I'm Joe Rotella, Chief Medical Officer for the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, and I'm here at the Annual Assembly of Hospice and Palliative Care 2019, and pleased to be speaking with a special guest, Russ Portenoy, a past president of AAHPM. Hi, Russ.
Hi, Joe.
When were you president of the Academy?
I was president in the 2008 to 2009 year.
And what were the big issues at that time?
Well, remarkably enough, the Academy had been around at that point for more than 15 years, but we really didn't have a strong governance structure. There was a board, but there really wasn't a system set up so that the board could function in a way to accomplish what needed to be accomplished to grow the field. And that was the year after Steve Smith joined us as CEO. And Steve's brought to the Academy this first effort to develop a structure, a governance structure that had the capability of actually getting work done, supervised by the board, but implemented by membership below the board. So it was in my year that we actually developed things like the individual task forces and the committees. All that structure changed. In fact, I remember the board meeting at which we rolled out the grand plan. And most of the board members had not been prepared for that, had not known that that was going to happen. And it was a very, very vigorous discussion, because the question for the board members basically boiled down to, why set up all of this infrastructure? What are we trying to accomplish here? But I have to say that there was, by the end of that meeting, such support and enthusiasm for the Academy to grow to something that would be more dynamic, have a more positive impact on the field. And from that point on, that governance structure was implemented, and what the Academy has accomplished in the subsequent years has been breathtaking.
And it's fair to say that that structure is what really enabled the Academy to transform so much over the last 10 years. And how have you seen it change?
To me, it's been really a remarkable, stunning evolution that really tracks along with what's happened in the field as a whole. Right? I tell my trainees that I got into palliative care in the early 90s, like 91, but I was constrained a little bit because I had no idea what it was. I liked it, but I couldn't define it. I liked it, but I didn't know what it actually amounted to. And then I got involved in the Academy, and I sort of learned what people who liked palliative care were doing. But we had no grasp of what would have to happen nationally so that it would actually become an important part of healthcare. I was very involved over the years in having palliative medicine accepted as a formal subspecialty of medicine. That was one of my professional volunteer activities that was very important to me, and I spent 10 years on that project. And around that time, you could see that we were achieving subspecialty status. Nursing had gone in that direction. The number of people interested were growing. And then the question is, where was this field going to go in terms of professional support, in terms of advocacy, in terms of public information, in terms of research support? Where was this field going to go? And I think that in my year as president, there were decisions made by the board that set up the processes, or at least set up the structure that could then establish the processes so that the Academy began to influence all of those areas in a positive way, culminating in you being named and the Academy now really participating in what's an extraordinary change in healthcare, which is to bring palliative care into mainstream medicine.
Well, you've had a remarkable career, and what was that year like for you in terms of your own development as a leader?
I've learned a tremendous amount, and I have to say that the things that I learned during my year as president of the Academy have been very useful to me subsequently in all the work that I've ever done that I would call program development. So part of my career has always been, like many other people who do what I do, has always been to try to create new programs, make old programs work better, get data about programs so that you can convince other people to participate. And what I learned that year on the board was how to take a very disparate group of people who were committed to a goal but didn't really have a linear track from A to B, and how to get the buy-in so that they would see that if the structure was set up and leaders were selected to run specific aspects of that structure, you could actually end up with deliverables that you could then share, and there would sort of be this momentum that would be developed, that the more that was being produced, the more people wanted to participate, more volunteers, and the more activity. And I don't really think I had that skill set starting that presidency year. And I really owe it to the management of the academy, and we had a very strong year, I think, as a board. And I think I really took that experience and then used it in the program development activities that I have been engaged in since the last 11 years after that.
So when you look forward and think about maybe the next 5 or 10 years, what do you think the next big push is for our field and for the academy?
Well, healthcare is transforming in the U.S. in a dramatic way now. And about every day, I have a conversation where I tell somebody that the healthcare system is completely and utterly broken, and I tell somebody that the healthcare system is transforming into something potentially much better. And I think you can hold those two thoughts in your head at the same time because of how dynamic things are right now. So I don't think anybody can predict what healthcare will look like in 5 years. The changes are just too dramatic, and they're happening at every level of the health system. What has to happen, obviously, is that palliative care has to be fully integrated into the new health system, however that evolves, so that it is sustainable, it has standards and the potential for growth and the potential to become more evidence-based, and will touch the lives of much larger numbers of people who are chronically ill. That's a very broad issue, a very broad set of issues. And if you said, what do you think is the task of the academy? It's to drive that process in any way possible. And that's one of the reasons, I think, circling back to the governance structure of the academy, if you're going to drive that process, you're going to have to drive it through advocacy with payers. You're going to have to drive it through education of professionals. You're going to have to drive it through support for research for an evidence base. You're going to have to drive it through governmental activities. And the academy, through its current structure, has its fingers in all those areas. And that's why it's it's a wonderful organization. I've really felt that way ever since I got involved in the 90s. I thought this is a very, very extraordinary professional society, in part because everybody who wants to do palliative care is just so nice, but not only. It's because it seems like it's the organization at the right time in history to have a major impact in driving healthcare transformation to a place that's a much better system. Where it's going to end up and how we're going to get there, Joe, I tell you, I really, as you know from conversations we've had in the past, I have really no idea, and some days I'm optimistic and then some days I'm not. But no question that we're going to move to be part of this transformational process, which focuses on, as you know, it focuses on improving quality and improving the patient experience and finally reducing cost. It's all going to be driven in that direction. And we are a part of it, palliative care already a part of it. And the challenge for the president this year and going forward, and for yourself, is how do you pick your battles and really drive the process forward where it's most likely to have influence. I'm pretty confident that palliative care, and I've said this 1,000 times to the people that I work with, we will be one of the winners in healthcare transformation. But nobody's going to get everything they want. So I think that there's a lot of battles ahead too. And I think the Academy is well positioned to be part of that.
So if I could get a little more personal, on those days when you do feel optimistic or you're feeling joy in your work, where does that come for you?
That's an interesting question, because I've been very fortunate. I have always been able to have a very strong, positive interaction with the work that I do, and sometimes it takes the form of becoming deeply committed to the mission of an organization, and sometimes it takes the form of developing a new program and feeling a tremendous source of accomplishment and pride in having it be implemented. And in my past life, it often came from doing clinical work well. And I've always been able, and so I've always, been a multitasking professional in that sense. I always did all those things. Going forward, most of what I'm going to be doing is going to be in program development, administration, and education. Those are my areas that seem to be open to me for the rest of my career. And I can really say that on any day that I'm feeling good, it's because one of those three things have gone well. and I wouldn't try to say at this point on this day that it's going to be one or the other, because all three are still open to me as of today, and I'm going to keep going in all three until something else pushes me in one way or the other.
Well, it's wonderful to hear your still have the passion and your ongoing engagement to move the field forward. Are there any last words you'd like to give us, or maybe advice for a future leader, something like that?
I think that the one of the challenges we face clinically is this whole concept of upstreaming palliative care, what that actually looks like. In this country, we've been supportive of the concept of generalist palliative care and primary palliative care, and we've also been passionate about having specialist palliative care. But when you go out into the healthcare system, Joe, as you know, no one knows what that means. No one knows. I mean, at all levels, administration, payers, clinicians, no one knows what it means. And one of the big challenges now is to protect the mission of the academy to support the specialty, but at the same time drive the field upstream to the non-specialists, and to do that in the way so that there's a meaningful distinction between the two. So I think if I became president today, I'd probably sit down with management and say, how can we create a structure so that we have those kind of issues being dealt with all the time, because they're very prominent, at least where I work, they are very prominent, and they're going to have a big impact on how transformation ends up looking.
Well, I know that shortly you'll be leading the meeting of the JPSM editorial board, and I really appreciate your time with us, and thank you, and enjoy the rest of the assembly.
Thanks so much, Joe.